Good evening. Welcome to the October 7th, 2019 Planning Board meeting. We'll start with roll call.
Yelitsa Cheka.
Here.
Dale Vickers.
Here.
John Petrolino.
Here.
Bob Cardica. Manny Castaneda.
Here.
Suzanne Ludwig.
Here.
Christella Tella.
Here.
George Shadid. Claire Espino-Barber.
Here.
Jeff Crum.
Here. Thank you. We have a reading of the public announcement.
Please be advised that the notice requirements of the Open Public Meetings Act have been complied with and satisfied, and that the annual notice, which gave sufficient notice of the time, place, and conduct of all public meetings of the Planning Board of the City of New Brunswick, has been filed with the City Clerk and placed on an appropriate bulletin board in the lobby of City Hall, 78 Bayard Street, New Brunswick, New Jersey, and has been transmitted to the official newspaper of the City of New Brunswick, named Home News Tribune Star.
Stand to salute the flag. Allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next, we'll adopt the minutes of the board's August 12th meeting.
And it didn't make it onto here, but the September 9th meetings were all, minutes should have also been sent out. So we could adopt both.
We add that to the agenda.
Yeah, so we would need a motion to add it to the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Voice votes, okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We'll take them separately.
Yes.
Okay. Motion to approve the minutes from August 12th.
Motion to approve. Second.
All in favor? Motion to accept the minutes from the September 9th.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Resolutions for memorialization.
We have now.
Very good. We'll move on to the public hearing portion of the meeting. The first hearing is regarding amendments to the French Prospect Redevelopment Plan.
Certainly, think we don't have a copy. No, that's the redevelopment plan. I need a copy of the memo. I think we printed one short. Extra.
So I think should have all received a copy of this, of the proposed changes, but Dan, maybe you could give us a quick summary of
Absolutely.
the specific changes.
Just want to make sure that we're all. Yeah. There we go. So many things. Okay. So in short, if we're going to summarize, we will be changing the building height requirement for block 28. If you go to page 2 and 3, there's images, one of aerial from Google Maps and one of the original from the redevelopment plan itself as a plan area. There's a block 28, which is the one that is between Prospect Street, Plum Street, Somerset, and French. It currently has a ground floor parking lot on the Somerset side and I believe this is all parking structure here on the back. So the changes would be to allow a construction height of up to 250 feet on the block, whereas before 120 was called out by the redevelopment plan, and the underlying zone would permit up to 150 feet. Right now there are 0 lot line setbacks on all except I believe one of the lot lines, which I think is French Street, but this would be inapplicable to the one parcel toward the parking lot, the ground floor parking lot, which is what is being considered for redevelopment here. And instead, they are considering a possibility of going negative as they may go above the sidewalk on 2 frontages and create a pedestrian walk or an internal skywalk connecting this hypothetical conceptual building on that corner to the existing Rockwood campus across over Plum Street.
Dan, before you go on,
Yes.
could you help orient, for anybody who who maybe doesn't have a visual,
Yes.
particular public,
Sure.
help orient the area that we're talking about, like from a street. So we're talking about between Somerset and French Street, right?
Right.
And then Plum sort of divides the redevelopment
Through the
area.
middle, yes,
And then there's Prospect Street to the west.
this is correct.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And so when you say that the right-of-way or the potential negative setback, it's not so much that we're losing sidewalk?
We will not be losing any sidewalk whatsoever.
Okay.
This would be all aerial air rights easements,
Okay.
100%. There would be no street or sidewalk cross.
And
As
can the
envisioned.
plan reflect that in some way, that we're not talking about the diminishment of the sidewalk, but only the aerial portion?
The amendment can reflect that the amendments haven't been formally worded out, so when we go
Okay.
through the council ordinance process, we can ensure that it states that.
Great, thank you.
We are considering an averaging out of the different medical and medical adjacent office types for their parking requirements. Right now, the plan calls out for one space for every 200 square feet of general floor area. Our zoning code for regular medical office is actually 250 feet currently, as well as it allows 525 feet for laboratory space and 400 for general office. Averaging out the 250, the 525, and the 400, we would come to 391, and the goal here would be to round up to 400 square feet of GFA per parking space.
On that point, I mean, this is really a small surface parking lot, essentially the undeveloped portion,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a gigantic parking structure attached to
Correct.
the.
Right.
I'm even
I
wondering-
believe that the structure across Plum Street is actually also parking, the one that
Okay,
fronts.
right.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, I'm wondering if, I don't know, is it possible through some sort of shared use agreement, if this is going to be a private developer or if this is going to be the hospital, do we even need to require any additional parking spots, given just how much structured parking we have around this?
Well, additionally, if we will just jump ahead to the last point, especially that I added for clarity's sake, would be that the redevelopment plan also calls for parking to be located on the redevelopment area, but this amendment would also change that, much like many other projects that come before the board, that they can find parking off-site, or they can prove reductions in parking depending on needs and traffic studies, that this place would also be able to do the same. Okay, not a problem. And then currently, the sites, the block, per the plan, has a block-wide FAR of 8 as allowable. Most of the block has been developed with parking structures, and parking structures we do typically count toward FAR here. So the solution that we've envisioned is to take and sort of actually bring it up to the board for discussion here. I sort of put 2 points in here to figure out how we wanted to best frame this. It ultimately ends up the same, but to either A, create a block-wide FAR of 20 to essentially allow this development to occur in spite of the existing parking by increasing the block-wide FAR, or to just designate an FAR for that particular site of 25. I sort of wanted to defer to the board for their opinions on which way to amend via best elegance of the way to design it. Ultimately, this is essentially the last part of the redevelopment of this of Block 28 at least, and possibly of the whole redevelopment plan. So the city feels flexible in terms of granting greater FAR than we had previously, as well as since we have a bunch of parking on the facility already, it does, and I believe it's 8 or 9 stories as is the existing parking, if not more. It does become problematic to actually build anything of meaning here on the front of the block without going significant in terms of the FAR. And those are the changes that we are proposing for advice and consent from the planning board.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or discussion on the FAR issue?
Mr. Chairman, just for clarification purposes, and the board members understand this for members of the audience, when there's a redevelopment zone ordinance that's proposed to be amended, City Council, the governing body, has the authorization to refer that to the planning board. They're required to refer to the planning board. The planning board makes its findings and recommendations because the planning board has subject matter expertise in this area. Those recommendations that are made are put in the form of a correspondence back to the governing body, and it's a recommendation to the planning board. The planning board does not have the legal authorization to actually enact ordinances, only the governing body can. And so the governing body will act, it can either accept, reject, or modify the recommendations of the planning board. But again, you have the subject matter expertise, so this would be appropriate discussion as to whether there will be modifications, as you had suggested, one of the modifications being to clearly spell out that it's airspace rather than right-of-way, public right-of-way, that would be encroached upon.
Thank you for that.
Sorry for
No, that's good. That's important. For everybody to consider. My thoughts on the FAR, I have no objection to either proposal. I think this site, from a community context standpoint, looks pretty fun. You have a surface parking lot next to a huge parking deck. So to encourage development at that site to sort of infill the block in a more appropriate use with the most flexible options possible for development at that site, I would be in favor of. I think having a specific FAR for that site of 25 would be acceptable to me, but I also have no objection to the other alternative option.
So that modification just kind of runs with the land, so if there's a change in use somewhere down the road,
No,
the FAR of 25 would
So, well, once the redevelopment plan is finished, any other changes in the future would, it would revert back down to the underlying zoning.
So there can be any changes to the use of the land other than what is currently there and what's being approved tonight, and then after that it's 25, and then any other changes, it reverts.
They would have to, right, unless by a designated redeveloper, if the plan is still alive, they would be working under those parameters. And they could come to the board for site plan approval for such a change.
But
otherwise,
they
no.
wanted the fact that we had previously approved and said, well, you already approved it at 25, so kind of stuck.
That's the board's call.
But
You
I
can
don't
still
know.
go back to
Just
the,
asking for opinion.
you can go back to the zoning board, correct?
For
a variance.
Yeah, right, they could, in theory, go.
So they would need a variance if we approved change the map to the redevelopment
I
plan?
think if it's a D variance, they would need to go
Right.
back to the.
D variances would still need to go before the
Zoning.
zoning board. This isn't a redevelopment overlay zone, which means that you essentially have two zones here. You have the underlying zone, which is,
DHI, I believe.
and then
It's a hospital institutional zone.
with those standards that are applicable, and then the overlay zone, which is what this board is considering referring back to the governing body. A developer can come in and use either one of those two. If they decide to proceed under the redevelopment zone, and there is a standard that they can't meet, for instance, let's say anything but a D variance, any bulk standard that they cannot meet, they would come back before the planning board for a deviation from the redevelopment ordinance, not a variance. If there is a D variance, and that's one of the reasons why we're trying to avoid a D variance situation, it would have to go before the zoning board, which would be the only one, only board that's authorized to actually grant that type of relief.
No, I appreciate that clarification. My question is really directed more towards understanding what are the enduring ramifications of making a decision to have it applied to an entire block when that may change in the future, and if it had an impact that we couldn't rescind if a different constituted body had other thoughts on it. So,
Another body could, in this case, the planning board, if it's referred by the governing body, could amend that redevelopment plan or to abolish the redevelopment plan altogether. The ordinance, I mean, redevelopment.
Oh, right. Fair enough. I'm agnostic as well.
My only other comment would maybe be even to further strengthen this point about parking with language that would be something to the effect of encouraging parking off-site. Just to be maybe a little bit more explicit about the intent is not to actually build parking on this pretty small site when you have massive parking structure.
Right, there's, I believe, a parking structure off the redevelopment plan on French Street, and then there's one that's connected to the View Gateway building. It's not too far from the site. So there are options, there's existing.
And the hospital has its own parking on the
Right,
property.
significant amounts there, yeah.
I just feel like the last thing we need is more
Okay.
structures.
All
That
right.
said, when I drive downtown, I can never find parking. But I should walk, that's the answer. I guess we'll open up to the public for any questions, comments.
Good evening, members of the board. Oh, sure.
Say your name, spell your last name.
Charles Cratterville, New Brunswick today. KRATOBI.
You swear affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
You may proceed.
Did you know your address for the record?
I live on
Business.
Saddam Street in New Brunswick. And so the French Prospect redevelopment area is an interesting thing, and I want to actually thank the city for causing this another look at it, because I found some interesting things in here that I'll share with you. But first, I just want to understand, redevelopment plans do expire. It's my understanding this one expires after 30 years. If you amend it, do you get another 30 years or no?
Aaron?
You do.
You do. So this would give another 30 years for potential developments, because I see it expired actually in '04 most recently, so it's the halfway point, I guess.
It was amended in '04.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for clearing that up. Mr. Chairman, you touched on a question that was jumping out at me. Is this being done to accommodate a private developer that might do something like housing or something else, or it sounded like more like hospital? The hospital might be expanding to this site. Can the planning director give any insight?
Certainly. The intent that we've gotten from the designated redeveloper, conceptual at this point, is that they are seeking to develop this site for medical office purposes.
Entirely medical offices.
And possibly medical office adjacent. That's why I gave some latitude in the amendment for lab space or general office, but medical-related office space.
Thank you for the answer. And Mr. Chairman, you also rightly point out that the site looks funny right now. And just for those who might not know the history, the backstory of why it is the way it is, this designated redeveloper is a firm out of Lavalette called AST Development, and they had promised to deliver big things for this block. And the entire block was destroyed, including the last Hungarian restaurant in the city, the Chardass restaurant. And the sad part was the location of Chardass is that flat parking lot today where that developer broke their promise. They never built the housing that they were supposed to build there, that they had worked out the deal to build, that the city had touted was going to be coming to the neighborhood. And it sat, actually it's just kind of a gravel lot for many years before people like me complained, and eventually the parking authority turned it into what it is today. But I'm hesitant to do anything that the person who broke their promise wants us to do to help them make more money and have a bigger project in New Brunswick. But I don't have the power to vote for or against this. I'm just going to share with you some of my thoughts on the existing redevelopment plan and some things I think that are actually not being followed in this. So first I'll draw your attention to, do you guys have the original the 2004 amendment? Yeah, great. So on, it's map number 7 is on page 20. And that basically talks about adding dedicated turning lanes to both the southbound and northbound Route 27. This is important to do if you're putting a huge development here, and should have been done already. They did put, of course, the huge building on the French Street side, 10 Plum Street, opened about a decade ago. They never built the stuff on the flat lot, but they built a huge parking deck and a huge medical facility, and never did so much as improve that intersection. I had to fight just to get a crosswalk painted there on that, just so people could safely cross, and it's still not a safe place for pedestrians. There should be a traffic signal, a light there, and it's my understanding, it doesn't say anything about it in this plan, but that was a promise, again, that was broken by AST Development. They were going to actually pay.
State,
That's state road. That's a state
It
road
is.
that the developer doesn't have a say over how the state determines how they're gonna do it.
I believe they agreed to pay for the cost of improving the intersection, and nothing was done, is all I'm saying. So I know they need state permission, but I think if they were willing to pay the cost of the signalizing the intersection, the state might welcome it. We don't know, because they didn't do their part. They broke their promise, is my point.
Mr. Chairman, I think that the state has exclusive jurisdiction as to the state highway. So even the city, this board certainly can opine about what they'd like to see there, but we don't have jurisdiction. And the developer, redeveloper in this case, would have to go to the state in order to get the state approval for any modifications to that road. The state already has a master plan, I'm sure. I can't be certain with this location, but they'd have to seek modification of that plan.
And I don't know if anybody has the institutional knowledge, because most of us are new when this was since developed, but I don't know if it's right or wrong to say that the developer failed their obligation. I don't think it's fair to opine on that without.
Well, I recall reading reports of what was going to happen at the time, and obviously some things didn't turn out the way they were
Sure.
described. So,
Yeah.
so that's all I'm saying, and I'm saying to take that into account. I'm not saying you have jurisdiction to force them to put a traffic signal in there. I wish you did, because then you'd probably vote yes and you could do it. But I'm just saying this developer that's asking you to double the height for their potential building has a track record of not delivering on the things they promised to deliver. And to that end, I want you to please take a look at page 15. I got this, I'm just going to follow along here. But this one has really bothered me for years, and this is why I'm glad you're revisiting the plan, because if you look at, well, actually page 14 describes what I'll read to you, and you can see the map on page 15, but it's basically pedestrian accessibility. It's listed as a requirement in the redevelopment plan. It says, quote, due to the length of development of the medical campus from the Amtrak trestle to Plum Street and the previous vacation of 2 streets within this area, pedestrian access between French Street and Somerset Street has become limited and circuitous. Quote, in order to reduce the barriers to pedestrian access between French Street and Somerset Street, the redevelopment of the redevelopment area shall include a publicly accessible pathway on Block 24 between French and Somerset. This pathway shall meet ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and New Jersey barrier-free code requirements. The pathway may be exterior to the buildings or interior to the buildings. In either case, the pathway shall be signed to indicate that the pathway is accessible to the public for their use. And this has been the type of thing that I'd heard had been a promise, had been part of the plan, but I was never really able to find where it was. And thanks to you guys bringing this up tonight and the city referring this to you, I found it just a few hours ago looking for it. This was a promise. It was supposed to be required. If you go right after the meeting, you go to the Child Health Institute, which is part of this redevelopment plan, you will see an elevator that's out of service on both sides, the upstairs and the downstairs. You can walk up the stairs, hopefully you get to the top of the stairs, you're in that nice little garden, if you've ever been in there, by the Child Health Institute, and sort of in between French and Somerset. It's a beautiful area, and it is open to the public, but then when you get to the building, the part where you're supposed to be able to pass through, to be able to get to Somerset Street to address this very issue in the redevelopment plan, well, that's now locked. I think during the Monday through Friday business day, it might not be, but I do know that it used to be open 24 hours a day. At some point, Robert Wood, Child Health Institute, PSNG, Specialized Children's Hospital, somebody made the call to lock those doors. And obviously at some point that elevator broke and it had to be taken out of service, and it's a disgusting kind of display there. It's just got, like a rusty chair blocking it, to tell folks that it's not open. I have a sign that says it's not working, and it's, not fair to people with mobility issues who are supposed to be able to get from French Street to Somerset Street. The hospital's taking over the town and breaking their promises about the concessions they're going to make, the things that they are going to deliver on. And so I'm very concerned about this. I hope that you won't remove this from the plan, but you'll make them follow the plan. And I really think that that's the least we deserve from the people who are building in our redevelopment areas. And, aside from that, I just would ask you to be skeptical of, developers who have a bad track record. That's all. Thank you.
But I would just comment that this is not being removed from the plan. There's no intention to remove it. I think it's probably worth looking into and talking to, seeing what the ordinance required from the original approval for the deck that was built. Seeing if there's a time period of which that's supposed to be open and closed, or was it supposed to be accessible 24 hours a day? Not having been here at that time, I can't speak for what was officially approved, but I think it's worth looking into, and if anything does get built there in the future, maybe memorializing that in future application about how that gets.
I would just say that there is no time of day that there's an ADA compliant path right now.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you.
The only thing I would say is that I have no problems with the accessibility of this pathway, that this proposed development would be on the separate block. This developer, while the possible medical office building is somewhat related to Robert Wood Johnson, Robert Wood Johnson seems to own the pathway, possibly, or the Children's Institute, some entity there, and that this redeveloper may not have the authority to change that. But it is worth looking into and finding out what the situation is, and I will come back with some information to the planning board at our next meeting with what the resolution was adopted whenever that was created, and with that site plan, and then we can go from there.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, but assume it's the Health Institute and the Children's Hospital. Those transactions will.
Any other public comment, questions? No? Thank you. Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the proposed amendments to the redevelopment plan?
Motion to approve.
Did someone second?
Just for clarification purposes, we're not actually approving the redevelopment plan. What we're doing is we're making a recommendation that the governing body approve it with the modifications that we've suggested. So it'll go in the form of a letter from, and a plan from Dan, Mr. Dominguez, I'm sorry, to the governing body.
All right. Bill Checkout.
Yes.
Dale Vickers.
Yes.
John Petrolino.
Yes.
Manuel Castaneda.
Yes.
Suzanne Weber.
Yes.
Chris Delatella.
Yes.
Claire Isman-Barber.
Yes.
Jeff Kwan.
Yes. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to move on to other matters of interest to the public. The first agenda item is the City of New Brunswick Municipal Public Access Plan. Planning Board's consideration of the Municipal Public Access Plan for adoption as official component of the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space element of the master plan, scheduled for November 18th.
Right. So what happened was, at the September 9th meeting, we, possibly a little too quick on the trigger, said the second Monday in November as the hearing date, which is November 11th, which happens to be Veterans Day. And so we're bringing it up again so that we're going to set it for November 18th, which is the third Monday, which is the actual day that the planning board is scheduled to meet. And so that will be the public hearing for the amendment to the master plan. And we'll be sending out notices this week.
Okay, great.
So that's all.
Just a schedule change.
Yes, so we just have to announce it. Yeah.
Do we need to take any action on that, or?
I don't believe we just last time.
Just notification.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, very good. Any other discussion items?
We want to address the open seat for vice chair.
We can talk about, I think, yes, we do. I think we want to, I don't know if it's been given any thought that we do have a vacancy for the vice chair right now. And if that's something we want
At
to,
any point during the year, the board can act to fill that vacancy. So if it chooses to do that tonight, we would have to add it to the agenda, obviously. We could add it again by vote, consent, and then act. Or you can wait until the November meeting.
What do you think, Mr. Chairman?
I think let's add it for an agenda item for the November meeting. And we will make a nomination and take a vote for vice chair. Any other discussion? Points? Members? None? Public comment?
Good evening, once again, Charles Stratton from Brunswick today. Can I get the next date for the TAC meeting? It's the third Wednesday?
It is the
as
third
usual.
Wednesday.
10 or?
10. There's no minor site plan. I told Bert to put canceled on the website. So yes, 10 at the third Wednesday, which I'll just announce it. So you asked, it's the 16th, yes.
Thank you. I wanted to ask council, the best number to reach out is at Bob Smith and Associates.
My office number.
Okay, I did leave you a message. I don't know if you got it.
I haven't even checked messages in the past couple of days.
Okay, so this should be a straightforward question. I'll just ask it right here. The minor site plan committee, which I'm learning about, do they do resolutions memorialization? Or?
I spoke to Aravind either yesterday or Friday about this because we spoke on the phone that I wasn't sure, and the answer is that yes,
They do
the
it.
applications we memorialize them.
Okay,
Those
so
are-
I could get copies of them if I need.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, and then the final question, I ran into Mr. Athol in another meeting and tipped him off that I might be asking about this, but I want to know, because one of the esteemed members of the board is running for office and potentially going to be serving as a county freeholder next year. I just want to ask if it's legal for an elected official at the county level to serve on the planning board, and if that's going to happen in this case.
I don't know that any member is actually on the county freeholders, is a county freeholder at this time. So if they win the election, at that point, there's no conflict. So there's no prohibition against that person being a member of this board.
Okay, so win or lose, she can continue her service if she
We're
wants.
talking about a hypothetical, yes.
A likely
Win
hypothetical.
or lose. Right.
Okay, well,
But you know, the thing, Mr. Gretel, is that these folks are all volunteers.
Yes, sir.
So I think that it's difficult to get people to honor their commitments and to actually show up to meetings and, you know, give plenty of their time. So I think that's taken into consideration as well.
Okay, well, I'll just say to everybody, thank you for your service and best of luck in the race.
Thank you. Any other discussion? None? Very good. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Fix it again.
Thank you.